You may be seated. The court is now in session. This morning, the Chamber will continue to hear the testimony of the witness, Mr. Steve Heder, who will be questioned by the accused upon defense. And before I hand the floor over to the defense team, Mr. Chakraborty, could you report the attendance of the parties and individuals to today's proceeding? Chakraborty. Mr. President, for today's proceeding, all parties to the case are present. On a side note, Noji is present in the holding cell downstairs, pursuant to the decision of the trial chamber concerning his health. And the witness, Mr. Steve Heder, is present in the courtroom. Thank you. President, thank you. The defense counsel for Kieu Sampon, you may now proceed. Please wait, counsel. Mr. Steve Heder, do you have an issue to raise with the chamber?
If I might be allowed, I'd like to make 3 very quick points on translation and terminology, since that comes up again and again. Yes? Go ahead. Or, yeah?
Yes, Mr. Steve Heder, you may proceed.
Thank you. This world of code numbers and abbreviations, as I've been told in numerous interviews, this language was designed, intended to be obscure and opaque, designed and intended to leave outsiders confused and uncertain as to its meaning. The second point is that to deal with this kind of language, both scholars and intelligence people, like those who worked for FBIS, developed a set of conventions for translating this kind of language across all communist parties. And that's I try to follow those conventions that were developed by scholars and people working for organizations like FBIS. And third, very quickly, what this means is that the things that I'm characterizing as mistakes in the translation are not mistakes that arise as a result of some general incompetence on the part of translators. It doesn't reflect on their general competence. All it reflects on is a bit of unfamiliarity with these conventions. So these are not, in some sense, translation errors. They're errors in the usage of certain established scholarly and intelligence world conventions. So I just wanted to make all that clear before we go on. Thank you.
President, thank you, Mr. Heder, and the counsel. You may now proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors, and good morning to all the parties, and to you, Mr. Heder. I will continue to refer to the different terms and translations relating to that period of democratic Kampuchea. Just one point for purposes of clarification. How do you say Central Committee in Khmer?
Well, the full version would be Kanak Committee Kama Cham.
Et la version courte?
How about the short version?
Well, it could be Kanak Macham, which would be central calm. But already when you do that, there's ambiguity. It could refer to the head of the Central Committee, or it could refer to one individual from within the Central Committee. And this convention was used throughout the hierarchy. So if you refer to Kanat Tambon, which is Sector Com, you don't know whether it's the sector, on the face of it, you don't know whether it's the sector committee, the secretary of the sector committee, or one of the members of the sector committee. So it's only through context that you can be absolutely sure what is meant, or close to sure as to what is meant.
Je poursuis.
Let me press on. At the hearing of the 15th of July at about 9:29, the co-prosecutor referred to your Article 7 Candidates for Prosecution, document E3/48, and in particular, page 65 in English. I will give the different ERN numbers. In English, it is 00393 553. In French, 00729 654. And in Khmer, 007 42 609. And this is the quotation. You are referring to reports, and this is what you say, and I quote: "These reports were sometimes addressed specifically to Pol Pot, including, depending on his abbreviation or alias, 009, but more often they were simply addressed to Brother or to the organization or to the Central Committee designated by its code name 870, end of quote." My question is as follows. Do you know the date on which that article was drafted? What were your factual and documentary sources for indicating that Pol Pot sometimes, or rather, that Pol Pot was often referred to by the code 009, and subsequently in your work in the Office of Co-Investigating Judges or Co-Prosecutors, did you obtain any documents to substantiate that term 009?
The answer to the first question, if I recall correctly, is that the basic research for this, that ultimately produced this published report, was in the late 90s. 98, 99 maybe 99, 2000. The documentary basis included material that was already in my possession, mostly received via David Chandler, and material that was made available to me by DC Cam. Some, but not all, I think, of the telegrams and reports and comparable or similar material that was later available for the court. I don't recall specifically seeing any new usage of the code 009 when I was working at the court, anything that I had not previously seen. I think that my recollection is that's a relatively unusual formulation. I'd also say, since it's in the text, where I say the Central Committee by its code number 870, I wouldn't stick by that formulation now, for what it's worth. As I've said, I think in earlier testimony, I I think it's better to understand 870 as referring to a level in the structure rather than anything specific at that level. So it's, to use an analogy, it's like Americans or American politicians talking about Washington. It means those guys up there and those things up there at the top, and then this is a coded reference to it. But who in Washington, what in Washington, is left unspecified.
Toujours sur ce point.
On this point, I would like to know whether, as you stated yesterday, that as part of your work at the ECCC you had access to the entire file. Did you also have access to statements by Mr. Kyo Sampan before the co-investigating judges?
Yes.
Sur ce point spécifique.
On this specific point regarding Code 870 in its hearings E3/37, ERN in French 00156681, in Khmer 00156676, and in English 00115674. This is what is stated regarding the Committee 870. May I request, Mr. President, that this part of the statement be placed on the screen? And this is what is indicated therein. The Organization 870 and Committee 870 refer to the party, which means Pol Pot. Pol Pot signed documents by writing 870 or 87. As for Working Group 870, it was one of the sections of Office 870. End of quote. First question on this matter. As part of your factual investigations, before, during, or after your mandate at the tribunal, be it with the co-investigating judges or the co-prosecutors, did you have access to documents in which 870 or 87 signatures corresponded to signatures on documents from Pol Pot directly? Did you obtain these documents or any other sources, including investigative reports, to this effect?
To my recollection, there is no piece of paper familiar to me, either as a result of my involvement with the court or from any other source, that clearly specifies that the usage of these abbreviations and codes in this particular manner must refer to Pol Pot. 87, to my recollection, was only used after January 79. It was very frequently used after January 79. And as I just said, I think now twice in various contexts, I mean, a phrase like COM 870 or org or organization 870 and similar such formulations for other levels within the party or other structures within the party, these are inherently, intentionally obscure and ambiguous. COM 870 could be the whole thing, the whole committee, the head of the committee, the secretary of the committee, or an individual member of the committee. ONCA, according to what I've been told, the way it's been explained to me, suggests a somewhat higher level. But again, how much higher is a matter for specification. So the only way that it's ever been made clear to me, or some people have attempted to make it clear to me in response to my questions to them, is, you have to get into the actual practice, the actual specifics of what's going on in a particular instance. So it, as has been described to me at other levels within the party, depends on the reality of a particular zone secretary or sector secretary or district secretary. Do they operate collegially, or are they a little lord in their level of operation? So at various levels, the reality of the way in which it operates in reality has been described to me in different ways. And I would think that this is applicable to this level as well. So it could mean what was suggested here. It could mean something else. Not a simple translation problem. I'm a bit, no, sorry to go on. The mention here of Krom Kangya, work team or working group, 870. I must say that I never heard that formulation before I joined working UNAKRT to assist the trials. Nor, I must say, have I heard it since. So my recollection is that came up with the testimony of Gangek Iyo alias Duik, and I haven't seen it elsewhere. It's defined here as an office, as the office or an office, depending on whether you think it's singular or plural, 870. And that would require further testimony, further documentation for me to talk about.
Je vous remercie de ces précisions.
Thank you for these clarifications. I would now like, first of all, to deal with the interview you had on the 17th of December 1996 with Mr. Ieng Seri. The transcript of that interview is in document E3/89. And you referred to this interview at the hearing of the 15th of July with the co-prosecutor at about 14 hours 48. Regarding this hearing, or this interview of the 17th of July 1996, is that the longest interview you had with Mr. Ieng Seri?
C'est toujours, je suis toujours dans la question de la terminologie. Je voudrais citer un passage.
Still regarding terminology, I would like to quote a passage from that interview transcript and request you to provide clarifications on this matter. It is document E3/89, and the page that is of interest to me is in French, and the ERN is 00332-700. In Khmer, it is 000-62477, and in English, 00417619. To perhaps make you more comfortable with the passage, perhaps I should request that you be shown both the English and Khmer versions of the transcript with the permission of the President. And may I request that this passage be placed on the screen, the Khmer version of this passage be placed on the screen.
Yes, you may proceed.
Donc je vous répète peut-être pour que vous puissiez...
Let me repeat so that you may follow what we're saying. The ERN in Khmer, which you are referring to, is 0062477. That is the ERN.
C'est bon?
Is that okay with you? You asked a question to Mr. Ieng Seri, and this was the answer he gave. I would allow you to read the rest of the question and the answer in order to respond to my question more clearly. The middle of the question. Well, I think that if it was a hierarchy, it would be Nunchia or Kyo Sampan. In a word, in education, in the management of education, someone on the front and someone... Let me start. So it is my understanding, if the upper level was Nunchia and Kyo Sampan, in a word meaning the organizational training side and the front side, when the front was gotten rid of, there remained just organizational training. And Ieng Seri's answer was as follows. On that, Kyo Sampan was an office chairman, but office chairman on the industry side. So there were 2 or 3 office chairmen. The office chairman was Pang, working as economics chairman. Pang was the most senior. Then Kyo Sampan, in what did they call it? The front, but he was inside there and inside the office there. He thought about intellectuals, the front, what other office chairmen were there, Lim, and there was another one, Pum. Pum was on the school side. Yes, with the school. He thought about the school. Everything was personally up to Nunchia. New question put from you. And what side was Lim on? Ieng Seri's response was as follows. Lim was in security. Lim was responsible for protection. Lim was not security. That's right. Protection too. In parentheses, after Pang died, Lim was in overall charge of everything. That's right. He had overall responsibility, but Lim was a member of the Jarai minority. End of quote.
La raison pour laquelle je vous...
The reason I am presenting this segment to you is that Munti is being mentioned in this passage. I believe in the Khmer version. You could confirm this. Therefore, we're speaking about office, the industry office. But as I read this segment, I don't see which office it's about. So maybe you could shed light on this. Which office are you speaking about? And which period are you speaking about? If you remember, maybe you need to refresh your memory a little bit more by going over the document again. But in terms of terminology, there's only the word office, and I don't know exactly what it refers to.
I don't know if I can move what's on my screen or it has to be moved for me. But if it has to be moved for me, it has to be moved so that I can see the whole passage. It's cut off on one end and cut off at the top and the bottom. So I don't want to move it for fear that I'm going to mess it up. There we go. So if I scroll over, I can do that. I just didn't want to.
Sinon, Monsieur Eder, vous avez la version.
Otherwise, Mr. Heder, you have the hard copy of the Khmer version.
Yes. What's translated in the English appears to be, as office, appears to be Manti throughout. And your specific question with regard to Kyo Sampan is?
Excusez-moi, Monsieur.
Mr. Heder, I am sorry. I believe the original version of this document, the Khmer. Did you have this interview with Mr. Yingsari in English or in Khmer? Because I see that the original document is in Khmer when I look at the French translation. So my first question was this interview conducted in Khmer or in English?
Khmer.
D'accord. Et
fine. So you have the Khmer version on the screen. Is that the case?
D'accord. Donc, c'est vraiment.
Since you spoke about the English translation when you were answering my question, well, what I'm really interested in is the context and the Khmer that was used. And when we speak about office with two people, Pong and Lim, I would like to know what office you're speaking about then.
Si vous vous en souvenez.
If you remember, of course.
Well, reading through this passage in the context of what I've been told over the years by many people, and also in the context of documents and interviews to which I had access when I was at the court, there's reference to the office, the chairman of the office named Bong. You will recall that that's the name that's given in the document you showed me yesterday for the chairman of the Office of Administration. From many other sources, including interviews that I did myself, not court interviews, but my own interviews, that's the same office that was also known as S71. And again, from interviews and not court and not from my interviews, court and non-court documents, but not including confessions. That's the office that oversaw a collection of other offices coded with the initial letter K, the first letter of the Khmer alphabet, Ga, and then a number. And the person who appears here as Lim is referred to by that name in some of the interviewing I've done, but in other interviewing it comes out as Lin with an N. And according to my own interviews, and also I believe, if I recall correctly, those of the court, this is the person who took over as chairman of this administrative office, 870 administrative office, alias office S71, after Bong was purged, sent to S21 in around the middle of 1978. So he was replaced by this fellow Lim, alias Lin, who had previously been, if I recall correctly, the chairman of the K1 office or chairman of part of the K1 office under S71. A former, as described here and other places, a former bodyguard of Pol Pot from the Northeast, who had security and bodyguard responsibilities vis-a-vis Pol Pot over a long period of time. The other people who are named, Pum, the other person who's named Pum and described as in charge of a school, he was, according to interviews, at least a member, maybe a vice chairman of S71, a leading figure, if not the leading figure, in the Communist Party League, and oversaw one of the K offices, which is responsible for party indoctrination at periodic meetings organized in Phnom Penh. If there's a specific question with regard to Kyo Samphan, I'm sorry, I've again forgotten it, how it's portrayed here and what, according to my interviews, it might mean.
In this very same document, Yang Sari speaks about the industry office. Does he use the word munti in the Khmer version? Speaking about Kyo Samphan?
Yes. And he doesn't actually say chairman of the industry office per se. He says that Kyo Samphan was also an office chairman, but a chairman over there with industry or something like that. So not entirely specific or clear. So he's saying was a chairman of an office, maybe on the industry side, maybe somewhere else.
And when you spoke about S71, you said that this was in connection with 800. Well, let me put my question to you differently. In your research, in your interviews, and in the factual elements that you gathered before and during the time you worked for the ECCC, for the OCIJ or for the OCP, did the term S71 connect with Office 870? Was this an office working in tandem with Office 870?
Excusez-moi.
I apologize. My colleague says that the translation was S21 in the Khmer version, but I'm speaking about S71. I just want to be clear about that. Please answer my question.
I've talked outside of the court context to some people who were present at the complex of party offices, which included the party headquarters before April 1975. And in those interviews, the explanation that's given to me is that already, at least by 1971, this code 870 was being used to refer to the center echelon of the party. And that in broad general terms, 870 was understood to be headquartered in this area sort of on the Kampong Cham, Kampong Thom border. And again, already in 1971, there was an office S71, subordinated to which there were a number of other offices, some designated with with the K, some designated with a B, some designated with a S, some designated with a KH. And the way in which S71 has been described to me is as a kind of, it is as a kind of office of administration. Somebody has to take care of the stationery, the filing, the gasoline, the radios, the cars, the motorbikes, all of that stuff that makes it possible for any bureaucratic organization to function. And those people, although they may not have a lot of political power, they have to be people who are good and can provide all of those services. So the people who are in charge are I've been told, are normally somebody you can trust, somebody the boss can trust. I've also been told that within that office, S71, or as part of it, there was something called a political office, which I was told was designated B17. There's not a lot on that, but the way it was described to me was as a kind of secretariat. So S71, according to these accounts, has existed since at least 1971. And then moves into Phnom Penh, and this is also based on interviews, and is elaborated, performing largely the same kinds of functions. At the same time, as we've seen from the document we examined yesterday, two separate offices are established, which in my interviews had never existed before. In other words, I never heard of the existence of Political Office 870 or this 870 Bureau, as I translated it yesterday. Never heard that nomenclature in connection with anything before April 75. And having discussed this matter of S71 with people familiar with the Vietnamese and Chinese Communist Party structures, they have said to me that this is what in China and Vietnam is known as the general office of the party, okay, with very, very similar functions as to those described by me with regard to S71 before April 75 and after April 75. Finally, I'll just make one last point, that in all of these interviews that I've done over the years, both before the court, while I was at the court, and since, there is enormous confusion about the difference between, if any, between Office S71 and Office 870. In fact, in most of the interviews that I've done, people talk about Office 870 and then describe what other people tell me is Office S71. So again, we're hit with confusion and ambiguity. Many people have identified Bong and then Lim, or Lin, to me as chairman of Office 870. On other occasions, people maybe whose understanding or knowledge is a little bit more inside say, well, no, it's actually S71 that Bong was head of, and S71 is just one of the offices of 870. So it's not the Office 870 in English, it's an Office 870 in English. And this is why it's hard to sort out what exactly is being referred to when any individual interviewee talks about Office 870. Could be one thing, could be something else. Without context, without specification, you can't be entirely sure.
Let me now turn to another excerpt on the very same topic again of Monsieur Que Sampans' statement on this very same topic, E3/37, same ERNs, in French, 00156-681, Khmer 00156-676, English 00156-754. The question put to Kyusampan by the investigating judge is the following. Can you describe to us the organization of Office 870 and its structure? And the word Munti is used in the Khmer version. And the answer is, it was an office of the Standing Committee made up of two people, Dunn and myself. Dunn was the president, and he was supported by assistant Pong, and he was in charge of politics. As far as I am concerned, I was in charge of establishing a price table for the cooperatives to distribute supplies to the region upon the instructions with the Standing Committee, and in charge of relations with Prince Norodom Sihanouk. Before he resigned, of course. End of quote, free translation. So my question is the following. In relation to what you said about S71 having acted as a political office, maybe, does Kyusampan's statement regarding this correspond to what was said in interviews with other people who might have echoed everything that you might have said regarding the distinction
The President, witness, please hold on. Mr. Prosecutor, you may proceed.
Mr. President, my learned friend is misrepresenting what Mr. Heder has already said by using the words when you said about S71 as a political office. Mr. Heder has not put it in those terms. He has said that after April 1975, there was reference to the political office of 870 and the 870 Bureau. So please do not misrepresent what Mr. Heder has already said.
Maybe it would be better for me to ask Mr. Heder to provide clarification on this. Does S71, or was S71 called by the people you interviewed, or in the documents you read, was it ever called political office, yes or no?
Au niveau, encore une fois.
Of course, based on your factual elements, that you have gathered.
I'm sorry, I may have spoken in a confusing manner. The answer to your question is no, that S71 was never referred to, as to my recollection, by anyone to whom I have spoken, as a or the political office of 870. The description that's given of it in the document that we examined yesterday as an administrative office, that meaning seems to be corroborated by almost all, if not all. There are always maybe partial exceptions, but of the interviews I've conducted. The problem that I tried to raise was that this phrase "Manti Pambayroichat," Office 870. Many people to whom I have interviewed before the court, while I was at the court, and since I've left the court, have talked about Office 870 and then gone on to describe Office S71. If I look at what they're talking about and compare it to other interviews, so if you, as I have often done, ask the question, who was the chairperson of Office 870? Indeed, some people will say, oh, it was Bong. Some people will say, oh, no, Bong, and then it was, I can't remember. And some people say, oh, I remember, it was Lin. And some people will say, no, it was Duan, and then it was Kyo Sampan. All of those things have been said to me. And this reflects, going back to my prefatory remarks, the results of the intentional obfuscation in the terminology. This was what it was designed to do, to make it hard for outsiders to figure out who's who and what's what.
Fine. So you speak about the code names used to confuse people. In the factual elements that you have gathered, and in your experience here at the court, does this seem to be consistent with what happened in other offices for which various other code names were used? Or based on your interviews, was this confusion phenomenon only related to Office 870?
I think I understand the question. This having of a mandi, having of an office, is something that, according to countless testimonies, existed throughout the entire party structure or hierarchy, if you prefer. Any party committee, any party-led structure, military or administrative, had to have, according to all of these accounts, an office. Again, to take care of the paperwork, to issue invitations to meetings, to keep the gasoline and the kerosene, and so on and so forth. And you know, it's a physical place to which people come, where files are kept. So, at every level and in every structure of any size, there was, on the one hand, a party committee led by a party secretary with a deputy secretary and more or less members, and then serving that party committee would be the office. And whether or not the chairman of the office would be a member of the party committee, according to these interviews, varied, but probably yes, that is to say, in most instances, yes. And again, as I said, the way people have described it to me, you put somebody in whom you have confidence in terms of their administrative skills and in terms of their political and or personal reliability into that position. Because effectively, as we all know from having been in any bureaucratic organization, those people are extremely important. So it existed throughout the entire hierarchy. The thing that's unique to my knowledge about the center is the establishment as of, was it October 75, the document we looked at? It's been a while. The establishment, or the attempted establishment, of this separate political office. That, to my knowledge, didn't exist at any other level.
And again, based on the factual elements you gathered before, during, and after working for this court, this S71 body that you are describing as an office of administration, can you tell us what its physical location was based on the testimony you gathered? Where was it in Phnom Penh, if you remember, based, of course, on the elements that you have gathered?
Wherever Bong wanted it to be on that particular day. It doesn't seem from the interviews I've had to have had an established permanent headquarters for him. It had all of these sub-offices, K1, K2, not K2, K1, K3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he seems to have moved around, often working out of K7, the so-called courier's office, which was on the waterfront near where Tapas used to be. I notice it's gone now. But I haven't been able to establish from interviews that it had a permanent seat.
Et toujours au niveau...
Still, with regard to the factual information you were privy to regarding Pong and in relation to the description you gave of the person who was viewed by the chief with confidence, during, before or after your time at the ECCC, be it when you were working for co-investigating judges or for the co-prosecutors, do you know how relations between Pong and Pol Pot were described?
On a couple of occasions, in a couple of interviews, a handful, a small number, people have talked about believing that the two were extremely, extremely close, and that Pong was very much a confidant of Pol Pot's in terms of all of these administrative matters. You can go back in time, and people recall that before he was chairman of office S71 in the wartime period, that is to say, at least from 1971, he'd performed a similar function at Office 100, which was the exile headquarters for the party in the mid-late 60s. And in that connection, I recall one or more interviews in which people said that it came as a great shock to them and left them extremely perplexed and worried when they heard that Pong had been arrested and accused of treason, because to their minds this was impossible. Impossible that Pong could be a traitor, impossible that Pol Pot could have him arrested as a traitor. So that seemed to be indicative of their understanding, as told to me, of how close the two men were.
Et toujours...
After Pong's arrest, still according to factual information you obtained before, during, or after your time at the ECCC working for the co-investigating judges or the co-prosecutors, as Ieng Sari told you in the extract I read out to you a while ago, was it indicated that it was Lim show that what others said was true, particularly what Lim said of him, of Pong, according to what you gathered as information or what you read in documents?
I'm sorry, maybe that I didn't quite get the question.
Je vais reformuler. Elle est
I will rephrase the question. It was perhaps too long. In the passage I read out to you a while ago, that is the extract of your interview with Mr. Ieng Seri, he refers to Pong, saying that he was succeeded by Lim, a Jerai. My question to you is as follows. This information, as Mr. Ieng Seri gave you, was it corroborated by any other facts you received before, during, or after your work for the co-investigating judges, saying that Lim succeeded Pong shortly after the arrival of the Vietnamese?
Shortly before the arrival of the Vietnamese, I presume. The answer is definitely yes. Multiple sources on that, in both before the court and during my time, and maybe not since, but certainly before the court and during my time at the court.
Je vous remercie. Je vois que le temps avance.
Thank you. I see that we're running out of time. Let me move on to another line of questioning.
Toujours pas sur le fond, là, c'est juste sur le contexte.
We are not talking about the front now. We are talking about the context in which you interviewed Mr. Ieng Seri on the 17th of December 1996. At the hearing during which you referred to that matter with the co-prosecutor, that is on the 15th of July, you stated that just a second, let me find my references. You stated that you took time to prepare for that interview with Mr. Ieng Seri because you were not able to meet him immediately in Pailin for a problem regarding the crossing of the border. The interview was in September 1996. Can you tell us what Mr. Ieng Seri's political position was at the time?
I guess at that time, December 96, he was still formally the head of the Democratic National Union movement, which was a political organization formed out of those who had some of those who had broken away from the Khmer Rouge in the course of mostly the second half of 1996.
Puisque vous évoquez le...
Since you refer to the name of Mr. Ieng Seri's movement, I'll show you a document very quickly to find out whether you are aware of it and whether you were aware of that document before the interview with Mr. Ieng Seri. May I request that document E3/86 be shown the witness, titled The Truths on the Dictatorial Pol Pot Regime in 1996.
Yes, you can do so.
The original is in English. May I know whether you read that document before your interview with Mr. Ieng Seri? The first page, ERN in French, 00614-092, ERN in English, 00081213, and it continues on the next page, and in Khmer 002244429. The English ERN is 0081213 for the first page. That is the English version.
Donc, première question, est-ce que vous aviez eu connaissance?
First question. Were you aware of this document before you met with Mr. Ingsari?
Yes. And this is actually, this document has my annotation on it. It says Ingsari in the English, top right-hand side. The document came to the court either directly or indirectly via me. I'm not sure whether it came directly or came via DC Cam. But this is actually the copy that I had in hand before I met Ingsari.
Donc, si je comprends bien,
So, if I understand correctly, at the time when you met with Mr. Ingsari, you were aware that there had been a split vis-à-vis Pol Pot at that time.
et que donc peut-être la parole
And that perhaps what Mr. Ingsari said at the time was within that framework, the framework of the split with Pol Pot. Was that your understanding of the situation at the time you interviewed him?
Yes.
Un autre document que je voudrais vous faire identifier.
Another document I would like you to identify at the hearing of the 15th of July 2013, you referred to your article in answer to a question put to you by the co-prosecutor. That is document E3/48. And in that response, you refer to the source of your note 361, and I would refer to the page of your article, the 7 candidates for prosecution. The English ERN is 00393581, and in Khmer 007424617, and there is no ERN for the French, and you state that you quoted passages from Deutsche statements in your footnotes, such as those found in an article by Nat Thayer. Mr. President, may I request your leave to show Mr. Eder document E3/1915. It is a Nat Thayer article titled Death in Detail. May I know whether we are talking about the same article?
Avec l'autorisation de Monsieur le Président, je voudrais qu'on remette.
With your leave, Mr. President, may I request that the English version of the article be shown to Mr. Eder?
Yes, you may do so.
C'est bien à cet article auquel vous faisiez référence.
Is that indeed the article you refer to in your own article?
Yes.
Ma question est la suivante.
My question to you is as follows. Apart from quotes from that article from Duke's statement referring to a secret meeting during which Mr. Kyosampan took notes, that is, apart from Deutsche's statements, do you have any other factual basis to corroborate the existence of this meeting referred to in the article and as you indicated during the hearing before this chamber.
Et quand je vous demande d'autres références, je ne parle pas.
And when I ask for other references, I am not referring necessarily to this article, but I am also referring to any information you may have obtained elsewhere as part of your work before, during, or after the time when you worked for the ECCC.
I'm afraid on this one I can't help. I don't recall specifically that this is the only such reference, but I also don't recall any other references. So, sorry, I can't help you.
D'accord, je me contente.
Very well. I'll take your word for it for the time being. I'll now go into another line of questioning. During your testimony before this chamber, you referred to your interview with Mr. Kyo Sampan on the 4th of August, 1980. The same applies to your interview with Mr. Yeng Seri. I am talking about the interview with the following references, E3/203. That is the interview you referred to at length in answer to questions put by the co-prosecutor. We'll talk about the circumstances of that interview and the period. We are on the 4th of August 1980. Can you tell the chamber, from a political standpoint, when you saw Mr. Kyo Sampan, what was his official stand at the time?
I'm not sure I recall specifically. After the reshuffling of the Democratic Kampuchea government, but before the establishment of the coalition government of Democratic Kampuchea, I think he was Prime Minister of the Democratic Kampuchea government, but I wouldn't swear to it. I have to check my own chronology to be sure.
Je voudrais, avec l'autorisation de Monsieur
With the authorization of the President, may I request that you be shown a mail you sent on the 11th of August 2009 to the co-investigating judges. The reference number is E3/514. E3/514. And the references of interest to me are on the page, and I would like the court officer to show the document to Mr. Heder.
Yes, you may proceed.
The page of interest to me has the following ERN. In French, 00417-794. In Khmer, 00401657, and in English, 00380171.
C'est au deuxième paragraphe.
And I'm referring to the second paragraph, and I'll read the second sentence in the second paragraph in French. You are referring to documents that you sent to the Office of Co-Investigating Judges, and this is what you said, and I quote, "One of these documents is a press conference held by Kyo Sampan and an interview on the 4th of August 1980. The press conference and the interview were held while I was an associate researcher at the Institute of Asian Studies at Chulalongkorn University and a contract analyst for Office of External Research of the Bureau of Intelligence and Research of the United States Department of State, researching recent and contemporary political developments in Cambodia on behalf of the Institute and with funding from the office. It occurred during a visit I made along with a number of journalists to a part of Siem Reap province, then under control of the Communist Party of Cambodia, at the invitation of the authorities as arranged by its diplomatic representatives in Bangkok, Thailand, notably the late Pech Bunreth. The visit extended over 2 days, during which Kyo Sampan made his press statement to the group of visitors and made himself available for interviews with the journalist and myself. In addition to these encounters, there were also several meals and informal conversations with Kyo Sampan, none of which were taped. There are 2 cassette tapes. End of quote.
Est-ce que nous sommes d'accord que...
Regarding the context of this interview, do you agree with me that it was the authorities of the Communist Party of Democratic Cambodia who invited you and other journalists to meet them? Is that indeed the context? What I mean is this the context of the interview, that there was a willingness on their part to provide information?
Counsel, please repeat your last statement and question. Is it too fast for the interpreter?
Look. D'accord.
Very well, I'll try to slow down. The problem is I am fast running out of time. You state that, or rather, do you confirm that that press conference was initiated at the behest of the Communist Party of Democratic Cambodia, that is, at the initiative of the authorities of the party?
Yes.
Et Monsieur Eder.
And Mr. Heder, as part of that invitation, did you hold discussions with other journalists regarding that willingness to provide information on the part of the authorities at the time?
I don't recall having done so. If I did so, it would at this time have been almost certainly only with journalists from the Kyoto news service, with whom I worked informally rather closely in this period. Other journalists I doubt whether I would have discussed it with. But I don't remember whether I discussed it beforehand with any of the journalists in my circle, or my former circle.
Et quand vous vous êtes présenté à Monsieur Kyo Sampan,
and when you met with Mr. Kyo Sampan, first question, was that the first time you were interviewing him?
I believe so, yes.
donc vous ne vous connaissiez pas auparavant.
Do you mean that you hadn't known him before and there were no friendship ties between the two of you?
Yes and yes.
Vu la manière dont j'ai posé ma question en français.
The manner in which I put the question in French, if you say yes, perhaps I should rephrase it. Do you mean that you didn't have any particular ties with Mr. Kyo Sampan at the time?
Yes, I had no particular ties.
Comment vous êtes-vous présenté à Monsieur Kyo Sampan? Est-ce que vous êtes...
How did you introduce yourself to Mr. Kyo Sampan? Did you introduce yourself as a researcher at the Institute of Asian Studies, as a consultant for the Office of Research and Intelligence, or as a journalist?
as a research fellow, as I explained the other day, this is the INR money is merely a matter of funding, as indicated here, not employment. So normally, if you're at SOAS and you get external funding, you're still at SOAS and you introduce yourself as SOAS, or whichever university, academic institution it might be.
Donc c'est en votre qualité de chercheur.
So it was in your capacity as a researcher that you introduced yourself to him?
Yes.
Et Monsieur Eder,
Mr. Heder, in that capacity as a researcher, as you introduce yourself, did Mr. Kyo Sampan place himself at your disposal the same way he did vis-à-vis other journalists at the time?
Yes.
lors de la conférence de presse,
During the press conference you attended, if I understood you correctly, what was the message conveyed at the time by the authorities of the Communist Party? What was the reason they gave for having brought together all those journalists, and what was the message they conveyed to them since you attended that press conference?
The press conference, to my recollection, dealt primarily with, as it was put to me by Kyo Sampan and the others present, the struggle against the Vietnamese, to make it short. In other words, the post-January 1979 situation.
donc c'était une
So the press conference was held in relation to the armed conflict that was prevalent at the time. Are you agreed on that with me?
Yes.
dans le cadre des
As part of the exchanges you had with Mr. Kyo Sampan and the other officials present, was the willingness to convey the message they wished to convey show that there was some kind of unity in the face of the Vietnamese aggression as part of the message that was conveyed to you by the officials in that press conference?
Unity, between Kyo Sampan and myself, Kyo Sampan on the one hand and myself and the journalists present on the other, or I'm not quite sure where the direction in which the question points.
je vais être plus précise.
Be more specific. At the time when all these officials of Democratic Cambodia were speaking to you, was the idea uppermost in their minds, according to your experience at the time, as someone who attended the press conference, showed that there was some unity in the movement in the context of the fight against the Vietnamese?
If you mean, did it appear from what Kyo Sampan said in the press conference and what others present said outside of that context, including Kyo Sampan, but not only Kyo Sampan, whether they all seem to be in agreement on the need to expel the Vietnamese, the answer is certainly yes. And those others, as I think I said the other day, or maybe I didn't specify, included Son Sen and Chuan Mun. Those are the two I remember most clearly having been present. So, yes, they seemed, at least on the surface of it, to be in complete unity on that issue.
Et est-il exact de dire que
Is it correct to say that that was the main topic of that press conference, to talk about the offensive against the Vietnamese, who are organizing themselves and who are active?
Yes.
Dans ces conditions, est-ce que
Under such circumstances, when you had the interview with Mr. Kyo Sampan, were you expecting him to make any particular revelations aimed at breaking up with the movement, which was at war at the time?
Witness, please wait. The prosecution, you may proceed.
Mr. President, I object on relevance. What's the relevance of what Mr. Heder was expecting Kyu Sompong might say about an unrelated topic that's not an issue in this trial? It's irrelevant, and I object.
Mr. President, the relevance is exactly the same as the relevance of the context of this interview. When we have a certain position in regard to certain political context has, of course, a consequence on what we may say or what we may not say. So my question was, given the context, of war existing at the time, if Mr. Heder, by asking this question, was expecting Kyu Sompong to break away from what had happened during the period of democratic Kampuchea. That was precisely the relevance of my question, to understand how, in the context, or in this particular context, he can assess the content of what was said to him by Kyu Sompong. But I see that I'm running out of time, and I'm going to turn to another point, and I will see if the Chamber can grant me another 10 minutes to get back to this particular point.
toujours
At the hearing of 11 July 2013, at around 2 o'clock, you said to the prosecutor, or you spoke about your article, Pol Pot and Kyu Sompong. The reference is E3/3169, page 28 in English in particular, French ERN 00722-089, English 0002770, Khmer 007114113, and in this segment you referred to, when speaking to the co-prosecutor, you say it is useful to mention the comments by Kyu Sompong in August 1980, and you refer to the interview you had with him, and a document that was published under his authority in July 1987. So I would like to provide to you, in relation to this article of 1987, with the assistance of the court officer, this is document E3/703, and I would like to know if you are referring to this document when you speak about a document that was published under the authority of Kyu Sompong in July 1987.
avec l'aide de monsieur.
So with the assistance of the court officer, may we provide this document E3/703 titled The Truth and Justice Regarding the Massacres Perpetrated by Democratic Kampuchea from 75 to 78, free translation.
Yes, you may do so.
Ce qui m'intéresse, c'est la première page.
I would like to focus on the first page in all three languages. French 00693-791, English 0003999, Khmer 007000545. So in this work that I just mentioned, are you referring to this document of July 1987, which apparently came from the office of the Vice President of Democratic Kampuchea in charge of foreign affairs?
Yes.
Donc, si je comprends bien,
So if I understand your article well, when you say that it was published under his authority, it is because we can see the mention Deputy President of Democratic Kampuchea in charge of foreign affairs. It is because back then he held this title, and that's why you say it was published under his authority. Is that correct? Yes, I saw you nodding. I didn't allow you to answer. I'm sorry. I will go a bit faster. I'm going to skip over this document and I just will ask a question about it. So aside from this mentioned Deputy President of Democratic Kampuchea in charge of foreign affairs, do you have any elements before that you received before, during, or after your work at the court? Did you receive any factual elements allowing you to know who wrote this document specifically? And if Mr. Kyosampa himself partook in the drafting of this document, do you have any elements that may substantiate this?
Not to my recollection, no.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I see that it is 20 to 11. I only have one single page left of questions based on one last document that I would like to show to Mr. Heder. This is a speech by Pol Pot speaking about Kyosampan, and then I will be able to finish quite quickly. So I will need an extra 10 minutes if you may grant them to me.
je précise que ces 10 minutes correspondent aux 10 minutes.
I would like to remind you that these 10 minutes correspond to the 10 minutes for this morning.
The President, I hand over the floor to Judge Silver Cartwright. You may proceed, Judge.
Yes, thank you, President. Before the President addresses the request for additional time by the Kyosampan defence, the President has asked me to clarify a couple of matters that the prosecutors have raised with the trial chamber by email. A first indication is that anything relating to matters that need discussion before the chamber closes the evidence portion of this trial will be an opportunity will be given probably early next week to do that. But there was one further matter that has just been raised, and if the prosecutors wish to address that following the conclusion of the Kyo Sampon's examination, then the Chamber would like to know how long you require for that, please.
Thank you, Judge Cartwright. On that second matter, we would probably not need more than 15 to 20 minutes maximum to make our submissions.
The President. Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor, for confirming this. The Chamber wishes to advise the Defense Counsel for Mr. Kyo Sampon that the Chamber grant you leave to put to have an additional 10 minutes to put question to Mr. Stephen Hadder. And together with the confirmation from the prosecution, the Chamber will adjourn now for 20 minutes, and the Chamber will resume at 11. Court officer is instructed to assist the witness during the break and have him return in this courtroom by 11. The court is now adjourned.